In order to return to his fiancée alive, he was forced to lay down his weapon and surrender to the enemy. Immediately after, he and the other prisoners of war were put onto a train headed deep into the rear territory of the Southern Army. As the train sped southward, the distance between Joseph and his fiancée grew farther and farther. His longing for her only intensified with each passing mile. To ease the pain of his aching heart, he filled his diary with countless words he wished he could say to his beloved. No one knew how much time had passed before they finally arrived at the remote Southern Army base. Far away from the front lines, the Southern Army soldiers escorting them began to mock and humiliate the prisoners with cruel words. Listening to their ridicule, Joseph was filled with fury, but when he thought of his distant homeland and the fiancée waiting eagerly for his return, he chose to stay silent, because at that moment, all he wanted was to survive. Just survive long enough to see her again. And then, right at that moment, a prisoner suddenly broke into a run, only to be shot dead by the Southern Army in the very next second. Seeing his comrade gunned down, Joseph burned with grief and rage, but as a prisoner, he could only remain silent and watch. Due to the brutal battles at the front, the number of prisoners had rapidly increased, and the Southern Army's existing POW camps were already overcrowded, so Joseph and the others were temporarily detained in a makeshift holding facility. Seeing that this place lacked high walls and barbed fences, one of his companions immediately suggested breaking out that night together with Joseph, but cautious as ever, Joseph believed they should stay for a few days first, observe the surroundings, and then decide. That night, his companion kept urging Joseph to seize the opportunity and escape with him at once, but Joseph insisted that life only comes once, and he couldn't risk it on a reckless gamble, because if he failed, he might never get the chance to return to his fiancée alive. He wasn't afraid of dying, but he desperately wanted to see her one last time before he did. Just as the two were in heated argument, gunshots rang out not far from the camp. It wasn't until the next morning that they learned two prisoners had tried to escape that night and were shot dead on the spot, which meant, if Joseph had agreed to flee the night before, they might have been the ones lying dead. In the days that followed, Joseph spent every moment closely observing everything inside the camp, carefully searching for any chance to escape. After several days of watching, he realized that although the camp had no high walls or fences, it was heavily guarded. The only slightly less guarded area was the hospital next to the POW camp, so he racked his brain to make himself fall seriously ill with a persistent fever, and together with his companion and a young recruit, they spun a mix of truths and lies to fool the guards. The guards ended up sending all three of them into the hospital next to the POW camp. Since there was only one doctor and one nurse in the hospital, the three of them could only wait in line at a corner, hoping to be treated. No one knew how long they had waited when suddenly, another prisoner escaped from the POW camp. Seeing many guards rush off to chase the fleeing prisoner, Joseph and his two companions seized the opportunity and bolted, but they were still spotted by a guard who had stayed behind. The young recruit who was running last was immediately shot dead on the spot by the guard. Joseph and his companion, running in the front, had no time to mourn or grieve. They just ran with everything they had, not daring to stop for even a second. Even as they heard the gunfire behind them, they didn't dare look back. They just kept sprinting forward with all their strength. They had no idea how long they ran until a wide river suddenly blocked their path. To mislead the guards chasing them, they took off their hats and coats, leaving them on the riverbank to create the illusion that they had jumped into the water and swum away. Then, they immediately continued fleeing along the riverbank. Sure enough, the guards who had chased them all the way were fooled by the discarded hats and coats. The guards quickly raised their guns and scanned the water for any trace of the escapees, but after searching for a long time and finding nothing, the furious guards could only fire into the river to vent their rage. By a stroke of luck, Joseph and his companion escaped the guards' pursuit, but they didn't dare let their guard down and continued fleeing at full speed. At that moment, they had no idea where they were. They could only run blindly through the woods, darting left and right like headless flies. For 2 whole days, Joseph and his companion kept wandering through the forest, but they still couldn't find their way out. The meager food they had brought with them had long since been eaten, and the constant running had taken a severe toll on Joseph, who was already feverish and physically weak. Helplessly, his companion began searching the area for wild berries to keep Joseph fed and give him some strength. To avoid dragging his companion down, Joseph urged him to leave and go on without him, but his kind-hearted companion couldn't bear to abandon Joseph in such a dangerous forest, so the two of them kept moving in stops and starts, resting and walking, until one night, they suddenly stumbled upon a farm. That unexpected sight of the farm instantly gave them hope for survival. Although seeking help from the farm might risk exposing their identities, The two of them, starving for days, ultimately decided to take the risk. They knocked on the door, only to discover that the people living inside were a family of black folks. Joseph and his companion went to great lengths to explain themselves before the family believed they weren't dangerous. It turned out the black family were all slaves, serving the farm's owner for generations, and the owner happened to be away and wouldn't return for 5 days. Right now, only the slaves were present on the farm. Learning that Joseph and his companion needed help, the kind-hearted slaves didn't hesitate for a second and shared their food with them. Joseph and his companion were thus able to rest at the farm for a few days, and it became one of the rare moments of peace during their escape. After a few days of rest, Joseph's condition gradually improved. On the night before the owner's return, the slaves quietly led them out of the farm. Not only did they tell Joseph and his companion the route heading north, but they also gave them a wooden boat that the owner had once rewarded them with. Joseph and his companion said goodbye to the slaves with deep gratitude and continued their escape by rowing the boat. They traveled for 2 days on the river, and once again, the food given to them by the slaves ran out. With no other choice, they decided to land and look for food. But before they could find anything, they unexpectedly encountered a few Southern Army soldiers. Luckily, the soldiers didn't notice them. They kept searching, and as night fell, they finally spotted a barn. Although they didn't find any food inside, they did get a good night's sleep on the hay. At dawn the next morning, they were suddenly awakened by someone. Startled, they jumped up and saw a woman holding a gun, with a black servant standing beside her. Without giving them a chance to speak, the woman immediately accused them of being thieves and threatened to hand them over to the patrol. Joseph and his companion hastily explained they weren't thieves. They lied, saying they were traveling merchants who had been too exhausted and had simply snuck into the barn to rest for the night. But the sharp-eyed woman was not so easily convinced. Although she didn't realize they were escaped Northern soldiers from a POW camp, she assumed they were deserters fleeing the Southern Army, so she suddenly changed her tone and kindly told them that she too was against the war. She said she had always been helping those who wandered in search of refuge. As she spoke, the woman even invited the two of them into her home as guests. Although Joseph and his companion didn't fully trust her, after days of starvation, they eventually nodded and accepted the invitation in hopes of getting some food. The woman not only gave them food but also prepared hot water for them to bathe, helping them relieve their physical and mental exhaustion. That very night, she even prepared a lavish dinner to welcome them, with her entire family dressing up as if they were hosting highly esteemed guests. After a hearty meal, Joseph and his companion completely let down their guard and truly believed the woman was a warm, kind, and hospitable soul. But just before dawn the next morning, the family's black servant Jim suddenly burst into the room and woke Joseph up. Jim anxiously told Joseph that the woman had already contacted the patrol to have them arrested, and he urged them to leave with him immediately. This sudden betrayal was hard for Joseph to accept, but in the end, he chose to believe Jim. Sure enough, as Joseph and his companion had just gotten dressed and stepped out of the woman's house, they saw 3 patrol officers rushing toward them. They had no choice but to flee through the back door in a panic, but the patrol officers weren't about to let them go so easily. While chasing after them, the officers also opened fire, and Jim, who was running last, was unfortunately shot in the arm. The 3 of them ran desperately and didn't know how far they had gone until they finally lost the patrol behind them. What Joseph couldn't understand was why Jim would risk everything to help them. It was only after talking that they learned Jim had long wanted to escape from the woman's household, and he had hoped to find someone to run away with, so they could look out for each other on the road. But none of the other slaves were willing to take that risk with him, which is why Jim chose to help Joseph and his companion. His goal was to join them and escape north together. After hearing Jim's story, Joseph and his companion warmly welcomed him into their escape group. After all, both Joseph and his companion were supporters of freeing the slaves, and more importantly, Jim had just saved their lives. They immediately returned with Jim to the wooden boat they had left by the river 3 days earlier, but they suddenly realized that 3 days ago, they had come ashore to find food, and even though they had eaten well at the woman's house, they still didn't have any extra supplies now. They had to find food again before they could continue their escape north. Jim then told them there was a white man living nearby, and that his mother was a slave in that household. He believed they could seek help from her. Jim also wanted to see his mother one last time before leaving, so Joseph and his companion followed Jim to the white man's house. Just then, a woman stepped out of the cabin, and even though they hadn't seen each other in 18 years, she recognized Jim at first glance as the son she had missed every single day. She couldn't believe it and kept calling out his name over and over. Jim, who had been sold away at the age of 12, was also overcome with emotion as he looked at the woman in front of him. He had never imagined he'd ever see his mother again in this lifetime. At that moment, words felt so powerless, and the mother and son, without saying a single thing, simply embraced each other tightly and broke down in tears. Though no words were exchanged, it was as if they were crying out all the sorrow of those 18 years, the longing, the pain, and the bitterness that had built up over nearly 2 decades. No one knew how long it took for their emotions to finally settle down, and the mother, mistaking Joseph and his companion for her son's new owners, looked at them with hesitation. When the mother learned from her son that these 2 men had escaped from a Southern Army POW camp and that her son planned to flee north with them, she felt both hope and dread. Her hope was that if her son reached the north he could regain his freedom and never again be the oppressed slave. Her dread was that if he were caught on the run he would surely be killed. But seeing the determination in her son's eyes, she stopped trying to dissuade him and immediately led them into the kitchen to prepare food. Just then, footsteps sounded outside the kitchen, and the mother hurried out. Hidden in the kitchen, the 3 of them overheard Jim's mother and the master speaking, and in her panic the normally submissive mother accidentally smashed a cup. The next second they heard her scream as she was beaten. The 3 hiding in the kitchen were discovered by another slave in the house and had no choice but to come out reluctantly. Under the master's threats and intimidation, the helpless mother told him everything that had happened. To their horror, the master decided to hand Joseph and the others over to the patrol for a reward. When the mother begged for her son's life, the master struck her hard with the butt of his gun. No one expected that the blow would accidentally kill Jim's mother. Witnessing the tragedy, kind-hearted Joseph snapped with fury, and as the master bent down to speak to his slaves, Joseph lunged forward and a fight broke out. The 3 of them seized the chance to struggle and flee. Racing desperately toward the wooden boat on the riverbank, they scrambled into the boat and paddled with all their strength. But as soon as they left the shore, the white owner and his household slaves gave chase. The enraged owner raised his gun and fired at them, but luckily the bullets missed. By sheer luck, Joseph and the others escaped. They continued downriver for a time until the channel turned and they were forced to abandon the boat and march north on foot. Through conversation, Joseph learned Jim also had an older brother who had been sold away in childhood and never heard from again. With Jim's mother killed by the white man, that long-lost brother became Jim's only remaining hope. Hearing Jim's tragic story, Joseph didn't know how to comfort him. As a man of relative privilege, he could not truly comprehend Jim's pain. All he could do was sit quietly beside Jim and listen to the indescribable sorrow in his voice. Finally, to dull the grief over his mother's death, Jim picked up an axe and went to chop wood, trying to tire himself into forgetfulness. Exhausted, Joseph and his companion leaned against a stone wall and fell into a deep sleep before they knew it. When they opened their eyes again, 2 Southern soldiers were standing over them with rifles aimed at their heads. The alert soldiers began to question the 2 unidentified suspicious men. In the critical moment, Joseph and his companion forced calm and hurriedly claimed they were just small traders resting their feet. But the soldiers pressed them, asking where they had come from and where they were going, because Joseph and his companion had escaped from a POW camp and didn't even know where they were. They had no idea of the names of nearby towns. Faced with the sudden interrogation, they stammered and could not answer. Just then Jim returned from chopping wood and without hesitation swung his axe at the Southern soldiers. Joseph grabbed the barrel of one soldier's rifle and fought back, and the 3 of them immediately grappled with the soldiers. In the end, the 3 of them captured one Southern soldier alive. Because the 3 of them were still on the run, it was impossible to keep a Southern soldier prisoner with them, so Joseph's companion suggested they shoot him on the spot. But kind-hearted Joseph stared at the captured soldier and found himself unable to pull the trigger. In Joseph's mind, it was one thing to kill an armed enemy in battle, but it was another to kill a man who had no weapon and had already surrendered. The Southern soldier quickly began to plead for his life, promising that he would never reveal their whereabouts to anyone. After a long hesitation, Joseph chose to believe him. They stripped the uniforms off the 2 dead soldiers and put them on. Then they tied the surviving soldier to a tree, and Joseph aimed his gun at him and warned, "We'll give you 1 hour. After an hour, you can shout for help, but if I hear your voice before that, I'll come back and kill you myself." Hearing this, the Southern soldier said nothing and silently nodded. Joseph and the others quickly gathered their things and left in haste. But not long after, their companion Jim suddenly stopped walking. He worried that the soldier tied to the tree might call for help early, or worse, betray their location, so he decided to stay behind and guard him. Joseph couldn't bear to agree to this, unwilling to leave his savior alone in such a dangerous place. But Jim's mind was made up. The truth was, Jim had another reason for giving up his northern escape. He wanted to stay and search for his older brother, who had been sold away when they were children and had been missing ever since. That brother was the only family Jim had left in the world. At that moment, Joseph suddenly realized how much he and Jim were alike. Jim was staying behind in danger to find his brother, while Joseph had once surrendered his weapon to survive, risking everything to escape from the POW camp and flee through countless dangers, all for the chance to return home and see his beloved fiancée again. So Joseph didn't try to persuade him anymore. He handed Jim a weapon and, with deep reluctance, said goodbye to his friend and savior. After days of escaping together, the three finally parted ways, each heading in a different direction, perhaps never to meet again. Joseph and his companion continued fleeing north for many more days, until one afternoon they unexpectedly ran into a Southern soldier in the forest. Because they were wearing Southern uniforms, the soldier mistook them for comrades, but when he saw two unfamiliar faces, he quickly grew suspicious and demanded to know their unit number. Hearing this, Joseph and his companion panicked, stammering without knowing what to say. Realizing their cover was about to be blown, they suddenly bolted, only to discover the woods around them were full of Southern troops. Gunfire erupted from all sides as they ran for their lives, until by sheer luck they found a place to hide. It was then they realized the Southern army was behind them, and the Northern army was ahead. They had unknowingly run straight into the middle of a battlefield. Because they were dressed in Southern uniforms, the Northern soldiers opened fire on them as well. With no other choice, they shouted their old Northern unit number at the top of their lungs while tearing off the Southern uniforms. After a long moment of confusion, the Northern soldiers finally believed them. Just then, a fierce battle broke out again between the two sides, and Joseph and his companions seized the opportunity to sprint toward the Northern lines. After enduring countless hardships, they finally made it back to the north they had longed for day and night. But Joseph did not feel as happy as he had imagined. He had planned to quietly slip back home and reunite with his fiancée. But now, by a twist of fate, he had returned straight to the army. That meant he had to stay and keep fighting, carrying his longing for his fiancée in his heart. Joseph then said goodbye to his loyal companion, parting with deep reluctance as each man returned to his own unit. And what awaited Joseph ahead was the endless slaughter of war and the torment of missing the woman he loved every single day and night. I'm a movie enthusiast. Thanks for watching. See you next time.